we have one more speaker tonight. And I have the privilege of introducing him. I'm not going to say much about him because he's got a story to tell. And I met him 18 years ago in King Mountain Correctional Center. Okay? I was there for a couple more years, so we got to go see each other in reunions and all this kind of stuff. And since then, I've been on 40-some walks. It doesn't matter how many I've been on, but I've met a lot of guys over those years, right? But I've never forgotten this guy. Now, back in, I think, December of 2010, we opened up Pocahontas State Correctional Center. And my brother Larry and I got to go there one day for a worship service, and I looked out, and there was my friend Gary Hendricks sitting out there in the crowd. Oh man, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven that day because I saw this smiling face. He's always got a smile on his face, and I love that. But other than a couple people in this group right here, he knows more of my family because he met my mama who died 16 years ago. He met her in prison because mama went with us to prison. He met my brother. He's met my son. He's met my son-in-law because we all went to prison together. He's met my nephew. He's met my wife. I mean, you know, it's a family thing with us. But we love this ministry. And, you know, blood kin is one thing. But the blood of Jesus Christ pulls people together in ways that nobody else can. And I tell you, I love this guy like a brother. Yes, I'm his older brother. Let's go ahead and just get that out of the way. I am his older brother. But I love this guy, and I promise you, he's a blessing to everybody, and he has been doing more than surviving all these years. He's been... Let's hear his story.
Kairos, give yourself a hand. Come on. God is good all the time. I want to set the record straight on something right away. I am not Michael Jordan. I'm not Mike. I'm not posing under another name. I'm not Michael Jordan, but I'm Gary, and I'm glad to be here. I'm glad I have this opportunity to share my story. But before I do have to do something that is very important to me that grips my heart in a very special way. I want to introduce my mom, who's here today, right here in the front row. And my lovely sister, who's here also. And once you hear my story, you'll see why it was important for me to introduce them. I want to just give you a little background on me. I was born and raised in Kansas City. Had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. At a very early age, I began to get involved with drugs and alcohol. Spent a lot of my years doing that. Really because I was a broken man in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's easy to walk around in life hurting with no one else really realizing how much you are hurting. It's easy to put on a facade and appear to be okay when inside there's an internal struggle that sometimes you can't even articulate to others. And I finally, after years of battling with that, I finally decided to join the military. I joined the Navy. And I spent a few years in the Navy, and in the Navy, I started to experiment with more drugs. And I started to use anything and everything I could get my hands on. I started using cocaine, and that was something that gripped my life in a way that I had never imagined. After getting out of the military, I went back to Kansas City, where at that time they had a drug that was called crack cocaine. And I began to experiment with that drug because at that point it really didn't matter. All I wanted to do was to numb the pain that was inside. And that gripped my life again like nothing had ever gripped my life. And I spent years battling with that. I caused a lot of pain in the lives of people who loved me, people who cared about me. And eventually I moved back to Virginia, and I stayed there for a while. And my addiction continued to grip me in a very powerful way. And as a result, I started to entertain the thought of committing criminal acts just to support my addiction. And I started out with what I call robbery by trickery. That's what I call it. And so I would go into these stores. I would go into a store and I would pick up items and pretend that I was going to buy them. And I would lay them on the counter. And as soon as the cashier thought that I was going to buy it, I would snatch the money and run. And I did that in hopes that, to me, that was the safest way to do it because I didn't want to hurt anybody. And I knew that. I wasn't raised that way. My mom didn't bring me up that way. But I allowed this addiction to grip me in such a way. And I went into a vitamin store. First time I had ever done anything like that, I went into a vitamin store. I walked through the store and I decided to grab a few items. It was my first time. I was nervous and, you know, I didn't know what to do. And I took some items and I laid them on the counter. And as soon as that woman opened that cash register, man, I stuck my hand in there and just grabbed whatever. And I think that in the end it was like $40. And man, I jetted out of that vitamin store, and I tell you, I could have beat Usain Bolt. I believe I could have outran. Now, if you don't know who Usain Bolt is, he's a world-class sprinter. He has broken records repeatedly. And I promise you, I felt like that I could have outran him that day. That's how scared I was. And I ran and got away scot clean. And later on, I decided to turn myself in. But before you start to say, hey, man, that was good. That was good of you. I ran out the store, ran to my car, reached in my pocket to get my keys, only to discover I didn't have them. Packed my back pocket to look for my wallet to discover I didn't have that either. And it dawned on me, I left my keys and my wallet on the counter. Listen, listen, I couldn't even get that right. I went down there and I turned myself in. I told the guy, I said, hey, man, look, I just committed a crime and I want to turn myself in. And the guy said, man, get out of here. Nobody comes into a place and just turn themselves in. I said, no, man, I'm telling you. He said, no, man, get out of here. I left. And I walked around a little bit and I thought about it. I said, man, well, they got my keys, they got my ID, they got my address. They could probably get in my house, sit down and wait for me to come home. You know, they had everything they needed in order to arrest me. And so I went back in and I said, you know, I'm telling you, I just committed a crime of robbery. And by that time it came over the radio that a store had just been robbed. And he said, well, you need to have a seat right here. He locked doors and everything there. He on the radio talking, we got one in here right now. And I was like, you know, and I was somewhat relieved. I was relieved that had happened. And I knew that eventually it would catch up with me. And I pled guilty. And I was sentenced to 5 years with 3 suspended. And I did a little bit over 13 months in prison. And I got out and I thought that I was going to do better. And it was my desire to do better. It was in my heart to do better. But don't you know that sometimes just because you're in love with the idea of doing better doesn't mean you'll do better? You can entertain the thought of doing better. It still doesn't mean that you'll do better. And I got out and repeated that same thing over again. And I turned myself in again. And I wasn't good at what I was doing. I mean, if you're going to rob a place, don't turn yourself in. I mean, come on, man. But anyway, I turned myself in, went down there and said, here I am again. And I believe they may have said, what's wrong with this guy? And this time, I pled guilty, and I was sentenced to 10 years, 5 years suspended. And I did maybe 3 years and 4 months in prison. I got out, went to a halfway house, started to go to some drug treatment centers, outside treatment programs, and I thought I was on my way of doing well, only to fall right back in that cycle of addiction. This time I stepped it up a little bit. And none of these instances did I ever have a weapon, did I ever put my hands on anyone. And I'm not saying that to minimize what happened, but I just want to give you perspective. But this time I kind of stepped it up a little bit. I decided, as I moved to Charlottesville, I decided that at this time, and mind you, every time I did it, I had been getting high. So I wasn't even really functioning well. And I walked into a Kmart in Charlottesville. I wrote a note, and I said, I have a gun. Give me the money. I didn't have a gun, but she didn't know that. The cashier didn't know that. And I walked into a part of the store, and I grabbed some fertilizer and something else, and I put it on the counter. And same type of behavior. And I jetted out of there. Once she gave me the money, I jetted out of there. I ain't turned myself in this time. Oh, man, I said, no, they're going to have to come get me. Because I was hurting. I was broken. I didn't understand my behavior. Why was I just in this perpetual cycle of self-destructive behavior? And I didn't understand it. And it pained me. It hurt me. And when you're addicted, sometimes it's hard to articulate that to someone who does not understand. Sometimes people will come up to you and say, why don't you just quit? Why don't you just stop? Can't you see what it's doing to your life? Can't you see how it's destroying you? Yes, I did. I saw it. But I was powerless, and I could not convey that to anyone around me. I hurt the very people who love me the most. And that's what happens when you're addicted. You hurt the people who love you the most. And I was arrested that time, but this time it was a whole different scenario. I was under what Virginia called the 3-strike law. 3 strikes you out, Gary. This time is going to be different. And I was told that I would be served a notice indicating that I would be sentenced or prosecuted under the Virginia 3-strike law. And if I was found guilty, I would be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. That I would never get out. And I was found guilty. I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. That I would never get out. And even if Virginia decided to reinstate parole because of how I was sentenced, it would not have ever applied to me, ever. And I thought about some of the talks up here. If you wanted, I heard something spoken about death row, and that's what I felt like. I wasn't on death row, but I was on death row. Because I was told that the only way that you're going to ever see society again is that you're coming out in a pine box. That's what I was told. You're coming out, Gary, in a pine box. And you're talking about somebody whose heart was crushed, who was devastated, broken, because I felt I had ruined my life, that I had destroyed my life. And I walked away, and I tell you, it had to be the power of God, because I walked away knowing that I would never, according to where and how I was sentenced, I would never see society again. And when I was sentenced, I was sent to a maximum security prison called Wallens Ridge in Virginia. And it's a supermax. It's a 23-hour lockdown. You're locked down for 23 hours a day. You come out for 1 hour a day. Everything that you need to do, from taking a shower, using the phone, had to be done within that 1 hour period. And you had 80 men who lived in one pod with you. So imagine that. I went to a Supermax and I did see some of the things that were traumatic. I saw people get hurt, get stabbed, people who fought for no reason at all. But I also saw a lot of hurting people, and I was amongst those hurting people. And at that time, I had to make a choice. And one of the things I realized is that you can make choices that will either imprison you or choices that will empower you. And I understood that. And I remember as a young boy, my mom used to send me to church, Paseo Baptist Church. I used to go, but I didn't always go to church. I went to the park. But I was close to the church. I mean, I was close to Jesus. I wasn't quite, you know. He knew I was there. He knew I was around. And she gave us a little change to put in the offering plate. And for me, that was money for the candy store. Because I didn't understand the principles or how important that was. But when I got to that prison, I had a point of reference. I at least knew that when you're in trouble, when you're at your end, when you're at the end of yourself, that you could call Jesus. You could call his name. You may not know what to say, how to say it, but sometimes just in calling the name is enough for heaven to respond. Enough for heaven to acknowledge that you're in need. And I called on the Lord and I asked the Lord to come into my heart. And I asked him to come into my life. And I had to do what I call an audit, an assessment of my life, an inventory. I had to become real with myself. I had to look at my life for what it really was. I had to interrogate my thoughts and question things that I once believed. You know, I had a hole in my soul. I had a hole in my soul, man, and I didn't realize then, but I realize now at the time I had a hole in my soul because there was a seat reserved only for the King, and his name was Jesus. And until he could sit on that seat, my life would never be different because I didn't have the power to change. I didn't have the power to transform. I didn't have the power to move in a direction where I could meet my purpose and my destiny. And so I got a little taste of the Lord, and I spent 6 years at Wallens Ridge State Prison. But I got to tell you that while I was there, just because I had given my life to the Lord did not mean that everything in my life changed. I woke up every day looking at those prison walls and those bars, and every time I would look at those bars, it would remind me of how I failed. Because, you know, sometimes your circumstance will talk to you. I'm just going to be real because sometimes we get this idea that things change instantly. No, there's a peace that comes inside, but you still have to deal with the issues of life. You still have to navigate through what you have created. And I felt like I made a permanent decision in a temporary circumstance that resulted in me having life in prison without the possibility of parole. I began to think about my mother, my sister, and my family. I began to think about how devastating that was to them. Because, see, when you're on drugs, the only person you think about is yourself. The only person that mattered at that time was me. And I wanted a real relationship with the Lord. I didn't want to learn 50 scriptures and be articulate in the word. I wanted to know how to live. Because I realized at that point, I didn't have a drug problem. And every time I say that, people say, what? All that crack you smoke and you don't have a drug problem? No, I didn't have a drug problem. Drugs was not my problem. I had a living problem. There was something so unacceptable inside of me, so broken inside of me that I thought that drugs was a way out, an escape. Because if I never fixed what was broken inside, I would always resort to going back to what I thought would ease the pain. It's almost like I think I've used the analogy, it's almost like a rat with cheese. If you take away the rat's desire to want cheese, you can put it on the trap all day long and he'll never go get it. If you would take away what was broken on the inside, if what could be fixed and healed on the inside, I knew that I would never, ever resort to using again. And so that journey was an ongoing journey. I thought about the word survive. Survive. It means to continue to live, continue to exist in spite of what you've gone through, in spite of what you faced. And so I was able to survive because I got through the court. I got through the time and I started doing time. And I started to adjust because you have to make certain adjustments in the system. You have to make certain decisions when you're in prison. You have to decide which direction you're going to go, how you're going to live, who's going to control what you do, who's going to influence you. You have to not be afraid to go against the grain or go against the I knew right away that I was not going to live my life for other people because I had done that for so many years. Living my life to impress people who today don't even remember my name. And I made that decision. And it's not an easy decision because everybody is not going to celebrate change. Everybody's not going to be happy. Everybody is not going to applaud that. And I started developing a relationship with the Lord, and I thought about the word thrive. Thrive. It means to grow and develop well, to mature, to make progress, to grow, to develop well. Because just because I survived and just because we survived something doesn't mean we're going to thrive. And just because we survived doesn't mean we're healed. You can survive trauma and tragedy and still not thrive. You can survive a divorce and still not thrive. You can survive the loss of a loved one and still lose yourself because you haven't made a decision to thrive. Meaning to grow and to develop well. I finally went to King Mountain. And when I got to King Mountain, there were some brothers there who began to mention Kairos. And I said, Kairos, yeah. I don't think I need Kairos. You know, because sometimes you get that what I call foolish pride. You kind of think you've arrived. It's like you read one book and you think you're a scholar. You done read one book and you just know everything. You know, you ever met that person? You know, I got a little bit of Jesus and it felt like I had arrived. I said, man, I don't need Kairos. I said, y'all can tell me what they do in Kairos and we can duplicate it out here. They said, no, it don't work like that. But I was grateful that they continued to approach me about Kairos. And finally I said, man, I'm going to go. But I still went with a sense of arrogance and pride. I said, well, yeah, I'll go. And me and God, we'll get these guys saved. We'll get them fixed, you know. And I almost started to tell God what the strategy was. You know, this is how we're going to do it, Lord. I've been thinking about this. I've been praying about it. And so this is how we're going to do this thing, you know. And I did. I went in with that type of mindset. And I'll never forget it. I sat at the table. There were men at that table. And, of course, I met Steve at Kairos prison inside. And I sat at the table, and my sponsor was there. And I said, well, God, here it goes right here. And, man, I started quoting scriptures, dropping bombs on them. I was getting stuff downloaded straight from heaven, and I was just shooting revelation out there. You know, I'm like, man, y'all better get this, man. This is hot off the press, you know. This stuff here, boy, straight from heaven. And it was funny because my sponsor and a couple other guys, they didn't respond. They were but they were listening. And I said, man, their wood must be wet. You know, something got to be wrong with these guys here, man. If that didn't light your fire, your wood is wet, man. I went home that day. I went to my cell that day, and the Lord began to speak to me. He said, Gary, it's not about them. It's about you. And he said, I really just want to love on you because, you know, you've never really known what agape love is like. And none of us do until we have that personal encounter. We don't know what an unconditional love, a relentless love, a love that won't give up, a love that will pursue you, even when you're trying to run, a love that will go after you in spite of your denial and your rejection of it. It keeps coming and coming and coming. It compels you to respond because it's a different type of love. And that day I began to sit at the table and I began to listen more attentively as the people began to speak. And I liked the transition that took place in there because when we first sat at the table, we were the table of Mark. And then they started speaking. They came with these posters and these markers, these color markers. I said, man, I ain't doing no color. I said, I'm grown, man. I ain't got time to be doing no color. I didn't come here to do no coloring and stuff like that. And but finally, as they began to talk and they began to share, they began to give us tools. And they began to talk about tearing down walls that we've built and forgiveness. And one of the things that was pivotal was not necessarily seeking forgiveness of others, which is important, but forgiving yourself. Because I was still going through that, but I hadn't forgiven myself for what I had created. The place that I found myself in. I was walking with the Lord, but I hadn't forgiven myself. I was trying to use, that relationship as a cover-up, if I can say it that way. I was doing all the right things, but I was still broken on the inside. And when they started to talk about agape love, choices and change and tearing down walls and forgiving, those things began to resonate. And so we went from a table to a family. That's an amazing transformation. We started saying the family of whatever. And I thought that was amazing because you began to see the power of God move in ways you had never seen it move before. And we went from the table of to brother, my brother. We'd go in there and we'd see people who we didn't think had a chance in the world to change. And God would make us out of a lie every time. Every time. There's a verse that says his word is like a hammer that breaks the rocks in pieces. God knows how to break the hardest heart. And I went through there and I did start coloring, man. I'll admit. I was going to leave that out, but no, I picked up something and I started, and I started making suggestions. Yeah, y'all to move that over there and make sure that's, and I had to be careful that I wasn't getting in God's way again. And I started doing those things, and as time went on, and we went through those ceremonies, and those things were amazing. But the thing that gripped my heart in Kairos, amongst a lot of things, was when I look on the board and they say, hey, man, I want you to know that these people are praying for you, and they're praying at this time, and they're praying at that time. That's a couple right there. And I looked on the board, and I said, man, these people don't even know me. And they're praying for me. They said they're not just praying for you, but they're praying for you by name. They know who you are. And at 11:30, somebody is saying, Lord, I lift up Gary to you. That was powerful to me, that someone would take the time out to pray for me. And the other thing was the letters. They gave me letters, man. I was like, what are they coming in here? These bag of letters. And I opened one, and it said, hello, Gary. Man, I cried right then. Listen, I cried right there because the letter was not generic. It was personal. It didn't come off a copy machine of, one letter being written and sent out to everybody. Those letters were personal. They were handwritten. And I tell you, man, as one of my brothers used to say, man, I cried the second coming of Noah's flood. Went through Kairos, man, and enjoyed the experience, had an opportunity to speak, and I got up on the mic, and I remember looking at Steve, man, and, and just bawling. Because, see, when the power of God touches you, when the Spirit of God does a work on the inside, you can look at a table and say, I ain't never seen a table like that before. Everything just looked different. Everything. Did you see that poster right there? That poster been up there all week. And you just see life different. And that's what the power of God does. That's what transformation does. I went out of Kairos equipped and fulfilled, changed. But guess what? My situation never changed. I had to continue to learn how to live with a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And I had no manual. I had nothing that could help me navigate through that. And I can tell you there were a lot of painful days, a lot of painful nights. There were a lot of nights where I'll be honest, I laid my head on a pillow and cried, man. I just could not understand how I got myself wrapped up in this situation. And I told the Lord after that Kairos experience, I told him, I said, I'm going to serve you, but I ain't trying to stay in here. I mean, some people tell you they'll serve you whether you're in prison. I would have served God no matter what, but I just I never said, Lord, I serve you whether I get out or not. Because in my heart somewhere, I just had this little flicker of hope. I just didn't know how. I couldn't explain it. And so I would always say, Lord, I'll serve you no matter what. I am going to do that. I will do that. And time went on. I had started to take the principles that Kairos had given me. One of the things I love the most is the prayer and share time. One of the things about Kairos that gripped me too was that they came back. Kairos comes back, man. They come back. Because most of the time people come in, do what they got to do, and then you'll never see them again. Kairos tell you, hey, we'll be back next month to see you. And they were definitely a blessing to me. And we would learn to pray and to build relationships, to talk about issues, to apply those principles. And so it gives you an opportunity to start living life on the inside, because it is a dark world. You won't be able to understand it unless you've lived it. It is a dark world, but it is full of hopelessness. But it doesn't mean that hope is not available. And Kairos shines a light in a dark place. They remind us, see, what they do is remind us that Jesus still loves us, that he still cares, that he's located us. He knows where we are. He knows how we feel. He knows what's going. Isn't it good when someone knows what you're going through? They know how you feel. They know how you're affected by your situation. And that's what Jesus knows. And man, I kept going. I said, I'm going to keep on living. But there were days I didn't want to. I petitioned the governor, wanted a pardon. And it took him 5 years to tell me no. And told me I had to wait another 3 years to put in another one. I said, man, that's 8 years. You could have turned me down. I could have been ready for another one, by then. And so I got to a point, I tried every avenue that I knew. And at one point, I took everything that I had, all of my transcripts and everything, and I said, Lord, I'll throw them away. And I took everything I had and I threw it in the trash. It was hard, but I threw everything I had in the trash. And all of a sudden, a year later, there was a conversation about a law called Fishback. And Fishback said if you had ever taken a jury trial and some things were not mentioned during that process in your transcript, you could be eligible for parole. And I said, I thought you told me to throw it away. Well, I started questioning myself too. Did I hear it? Was that me? And I didn't have anything to to reference. And finally, I thought about it. There was a woman that lived in Princeton that would do some legal things for me from time to time. And I told her the Lord told me to throw everything away. And I called her up one day and I said, yeah, they got something going on with Fishback. I said, but I don't have anything to show them because I threw all my transcripts away. She said, yeah, I remember you saying that. I said, man, I thought I heard from the Lord. She said, well, you did. She said, I got something to tell you, though. I said, what's that? She said, well, the Lord told you to throw yours away. He didn't tell me to throw mine away. Yeah. I said, girl, ooh, you special. Got those transcripts, sent them in. And at the same time, there were some men who had begun to talk to the governor or the mayor about what God was doing in my life. And I'll tell you that out of all those robberies, I probably got no more than less than $300. And I had life without the possibility of parole. And they began to talk to him, and I started to do my part with prayer. And finally, I got a parole date. You got to remember, they said that you have life without parole, that you will never see this side again. And if you came out, you come out in a pine box. I guess they didn't talk to God. And after spending 24 years in prison, 24 years, a moment had came where I would go up for parole, and I'd given it all to the Lord. I went up with 4 people. There was a lot of prayer being given on that situation. I went up with 4 people, and those 4 people, they got turned down. And I said, oh, Lord, I ran to my cell, and I'll tell you the truth. I ran to my cell, put my pillow over me because my cellie was up top, and I cried like a baby. I said, Lord, I can't go through this right here. And it was on March the 26th that they received their answer. I hadn't received anything yet. June 16th, the counselor came in and said, Gary, you got an answer. I was in the kitchen. He said, sit down. He said, you all right? I said, yeah. He said, man, have a seat. I said, oh, man, he got something to tell me, man. And he sat down, and he turned that paper around, and he slid that paper to me, and that paper said that I was granted parole. And while what I did was wrong, even when people throw you away, God will pick you up. He doesn't care where he finds you. You can be in the landfill of life. You can be at the lowest of lowest. Everybody may have written you off. They may not say you have any value, that you're not worth anything, that you can't possibly be of any value, but God sees different. God looks at us in a way that no one else could ever look at us. God sees us. And the thing I love about him, he doesn't see us when we've arrived, even though he knows the end from the beginning. I heard the scripture says that while we were yet sinners, Christ died. We were in our yet. We were a mess when he went to the cross. We were a mess when he died for us. He was the last thing on our mind when he was going to the cross. Or we were the last thing on his mind. Or we were the last thing that Jesus had on our minds when he died for us. And I want to share this with you in closing. I did come out in a pine box. It was called the cross. It was wood. It was wood. But it was the cross that made the difference. And I want to just encourage you tonight. I just want to encourage you today, man. Kairos, you guys are awesome. The fact that you would take the time, the fact that you would lend your services over, the fact that you would obey the Spirit of the Lord, the fact that you would be willing to encounter people that you don't know in hopes that to introduce them to a God that you believe can transform and change their lives. It takes courage to do that. It takes courage to change in prison. And one of the things the parole board realized is that I was already not only surviving, but thriving while I was in prison, before I had any hope of getting out, before parole was even available to me, before Fishback, I was already thriving to be all that God had called me to be. I was already available for him to use me at whatever capacity he wanted to use. I was already willing. I was on the tarmac, already ready to take off and allow him to use me in whatever way he decided to use me, man. So I thank God for Kairos. I thank God for what they do, what you guys do, and what you're continuously doing. And I just pray that God will continue to bless this ministry, expand this ministry, work in the lives, that more men and women will come out and be a part of this wonderful plan. Because we are a part of something that's bigger than the part that we play. Always remember that. God bless.